Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Wealth, Purpose, Peace. I'm Jonathan Hall,
I'm Brian Grant.
and we are financial advisors with Warburton Capital. And our goal with this podcast is to think through questions that we get asked by our clients all the time, but to not just stop there with answering the questions with a math answer, diving a little bit deeper. What's the question behind the question? I'm excited for this one because it's something that we run into as advisors all the time. The question we're addressing today is, what should I do when I receive an inheritance? And a lot of times, Brian, that's the first time that somebody's interacted with a decent sum of money. And it's the first time that we get a phone call. Hi, I'm so-and-so.
Yeah.
I just got a big check in the mail. What do I do?
Yeah, it comes up a lot, which is it's helpful certainly financially for the person receiving it, but it obviously comes with a lot of grief and a lot of baggage. And so, we could go a number of directions. I think the first place I would want to start is don't rush. I don't think the fog of grief is the best way to make a big decision. That's not your best moment. So give yourself some breathing room. And if that means parking it in cash in a savings account for 90 days, even 6 months, I'd rather see you do that. Get through some of the initial healing of the loss of your loved one, then come back and figure out what you want to do, or have time to meet with someone and let them help you figure out what to do. Because to your point, it can be a big pivot point, and you don't want to rush into making the wrong decision.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah, you should.
So, what this brings to mind is how inheritances have been dramatized in movies so frequently. As someone passes away, and then you receive a letter in the mail, and it says, you're invited to the reading of such and such's will. And it's this long-lost rich uncle that you had that you met once, but they left you the whole estate. Inevitably, you have to go through an entire journey and quest to get the estate, right? And I was thinking about that the other day. I was writing some thoughts down on family wealth transfer, and that's the topic of a different episode. But I had that visual in my mind because it's so dramatized and popularized, and so different than how it actually happens. Because to your point, there's usually a fair amount of grief that's associated with receiving this check, right? It's not necessarily this long lost rich relative that you had no idea that it was coming. It's often a parent or a spouse or a sibling or something like that. And right away, right off the bat, these financial decisions that we're making now have all of this emotion tied to it. So it's not necessarily just this fun windfall.
Right.
The decisions that we start trying to make can be really clouded. I agree with your thoughts. People will often come to us after a period of mourning, and honestly, I think as they should, with they stick it in a money market fund or in a CD for a little bit of time, and then they come to us often guilty, saying, I know it could have made so much more money. I've just left it in cash. I feel so bad. Like, don't feel bad about that. That was actually probably one of the smarter things you could have done.
Yeah, I'd rather see you do that than throw it all into something risky or pay off a bunch of debt without actually thinking through the implications of that or the other options available to you. Yeah, so I think you're right. The movie depiction is more like a lottery win, and that's just not what you're normally dealing with. So, good first step, right? Take a beat, give yourself a minute. To your point, let's say you're on the other side of that now. You come to us, you want to have a conversation. I think the first thing we want to do with someone is figure out, what did you actually inherit? Inheriting money is, what the title is and how it's phrased, but you can receive that a number of different ways. Did you get a big check and it's a bunch of cash?
Right.
Did you get life insurance proceeds? Did you inherit somebody's IRA?
Did you inherit a house?
Yeah, house, business interest. There's a host of things that could look like. And the framework on how to think through what to do with that inheritance depends on what you got. So, and in one of the big ways that things change based on what you inherited is, how is it taxed? what's the tax treatment of that inheritance? So maybe I don't know if you want to speak to a little bit, just broad strokes, kind of, okay, I got, my dad had a brokerage account with some stocks and bonds, and I inherited that. I also inherited his IRA. That's a big fork in the road that's real
Sure,
common.
sure. So you get the news that you've inherited these assets and you get some account statements. One says taxable account or brokerage, and the other says IRA on it. There are a couple, and we'll treat this as kind of the most common example that we see. There are always exceptions, and that's where working with a financial professional, financial advisor like us,
Mhm.
can be super helpful because we can look at the statements and say, this is what you have. This is exactly how we think it's going to go.
Yeah.
Most often with a brokerage account, when you inherit those assets, particularly from a parent or a grandparent or someone like that, you typically will receive a step up in basis. Meaning, if basis is a new term for any of our listeners, basis is essentially what you bought something for, the price that you paid. So let's say that someone paid $100,000 to purchase securities and it grew to $150,000. Your basis would be $100,000. The capital gain in that example is $50,000. So if that person then were to pass away and their son, let's say, were to inherit $150,000, you might think that you would have to pay capital gains tax on that 50,000. It's not how it works.
Mhm.
It's a step up in basis. So now when you inherit those assets, your basis becomes $150,000. And in another episode, we talk about, you know, how to leave assets to the next generation. So that's certainly a feature, not a bug, of a brokerage account. Let's flip the coin and talk about an IRA.
Yeah. Yeah, so with an IRA, the brokerage account's great, right? Because you don't have to pay any tax, and everybody loves that. With the IRA, it's going to be taxed to your beneficiaries as they withdraw assets, just as it would have been to you when you withdrew assets. But now it's going to be taxed at whatever their ordinary income tax rate is. So whatever other money they earned for the year, plus this amount they have to take out of the inherited IRA, is going to be taxed to them as ordinary income. So you still left them money. They're still better off than if they had none, but they are going to pay tax on it in that case. And it isn't at the capital gains rate, it's at their ordinary income tax rate. So there's a whole bunch of different rules on, the time frame you have to withdraw those assets from the IRA as the beneficiary, depending on what your relationship was to the person who passed. But generally speaking, it's over a 10-year period for most people. Again, that will deviate. The big point is just there are different tax implications to different assets that you inherit. Taking time to talk to someone who does this for a living, whether it's us or anyone, frankly, is going to help you. It's worth it. I've seen plenty of people make a $10,000 mistake trying to avoid a $1,000 fee, and it's not worth it. If this is a specialty for a reason. So, don't be afraid to go work with someone, partner with someone who can figure out with you what makes the most sense given your individual circumstance. Because like most things, the right answer for you is not going to be the same for me or for someone else.
Well, in this case specifically, in several of our episodes, we're able to give some kind of broad, sweeping advice that's less generalized,
Mhm.
because we can't just give financial advice to the entire public.
Mhm.
But in this case, it is genuinely so specific to each individual, like you said, that getting help from a financial professional is important.
Yeah.
And if you're working with a financial advisor, if some of our clients see this podcast, we'd love to get introductions to that next generation that's
Mm.
going to inherit your assets, to your children, your grandchildren, whoever it is, so that we can begin to have that relationship with them so that they know who to call, and that if and when the day comes, that we're not strangers
Right.
and we're not just, mom and dad's money people. We can actually be a help in a time of grief to help you think through these things during the fog of all of that. I mean,
Right.
how, not to uh, overdo it or overstate it, but when we meet with people right after someone passes away, there's often so much fog that we'll meet again in a month or in 2 months or in 3 months. And like the brain just doesn't retain anything during that time because that person is, trying to juggle all these logistics that have to do with the passing away of a loved one. And they're trying to make all these decisions, and having another human there to walk through that with you and help you think through it and help you not to make mistakes based on taxation is huge. And then helping you think through what to do with the money.
Yeah. Yeah. You need somebody objective who's not tied up to the emotional side as much. Um, but maybe, I mean, that's the point of the podcast. Let's start getting to that emotional side a little bit. So, because I think you see some people, depending on kind of their nature, let's say, take different emotional extremes, right? For some people, it's, they get this windfall and there's this rush to want to spend it, or like now we have the ability to do all these things we couldn't afford, and I can get the thing I didn't want. And you see that some. I think you also see the total opposite, which is like they feel too guilty to use it. It's like, well, I didn't earn it. I want to just spend what I earned, and this other bucket. It's mine, I know, but I don't want to touch it. So maybe people do something risky with it, or they just keep it in cash forever. I think operating at either emotional extreme can be a challenge. I don't think it serves you very well, and I don't know that it necessarily is the best way to honor the person who left you those assets. They left you the assets for a reason. You're not a stranger. They want you to enjoy it and do something with it. So I think one thing that helps is to maybe, for some people, create these kind of mental buckets, let's say, of like, okay, I got however many dollars. I'm going to use some of it for security, let's say. Like I'm going to have an emergency fund. I'm going to make sure that I'm got enough for retirement. I'm going to make sure that, that we're okay. I think they would have wanted that. Some for enjoyment. And that's where I think a lot of people struggle, right? Is it's like, well, this came from this terrible situation. I'm supposed to just enjoy this. But I think it doesn't have to be on frivolous things. You can do it in a meaningful way. Like I was trying to think of an example, and let's say your dad passed away and you and him had always worked on old cars growing up, and that was like your thing. And, there was this one car that you always wanted, and you knew he always wanted it, but you could never afford it. Now you can go get it. Maybe that's a way for you to drive around, enjoy that. You also know he would have loved that. That's kind of so it's a silly example, but I think it's a way that you can look at your situation, figure out how can I find something that brings me enjoyment that I think would also honor them. And then legacy. So that's, we've got security. I want to enjoy some stuff with some of the money. And then legacy. What do I want to give maybe to my kids, to that next generation, their grandkids, education, or setting them up for retirement, funding Roth IRAs for them if they've got some income. So there's ways to do each, but I think having a mental kind of bucket system to work through can help you do something intentional with it, is the goal.
Yeah, I like that concept of the multiple buckets for different types of essentially short, medium, and long-term goals in a sense.
Sure.
One of the things that you and I talked about in a different episode was about how do I help my kids financially? Or should I help my kids financially? One of the points we made in that podcast was the example that comes from flying in airplanes when they're doing the safety demonstration, right? You need to put on your own oxygen mask before helping someone else. And something I wanted to point out that I've noticed working with clients is that a lot of times they will tend to they might do the sentimental piece, right? They might go ahead and, I love that example, by the way.
Thanks.
Very cinematic. They might do that. They might go ahead and buy the car and do the sentimental thing. And then they will kind of pivot directly to legacy for the next generation. But the point we made in that podcast is because these are your assets now.
Mm-hmm.
They may have come from something sad or even tragic, depending on the circumstances, but they are your assets now. And having someone like an advisor who can look at it objectively and not be as tied into the emotion of that can help you to see that. a big mistake I think that we see people make sometimes is that they will skip over their own security goals towards this legacy goal. It almost feels like dirty money,
Right.
right? We've had situations where someone's inherited assets from their parents who died younger than obviously they would have hoped, and they weren't able to retire any longer, right? And so you receive those assets as one of that person's children, and you're kind of like, well, dang, I don't. You feel this huge weight of responsibility and this huge like, I wish I didn't have this. I wish that my dad still had it. We had another client who their mom passed away, and they inherited the assets, and and that bucket of money, on the flip side, that bucket of money was the thing that helped this individual finish becoming an adult and then continue to get their education and go on and do awesome things and kind of set them up for success, which I'm sure is exactly what his mother would have wanted.
Mhm.
Right. And so that individual security goal, I think, shouldn't be overlooked. The other elements are great if there's enough money there. But if you just received a windfall, don't panic. I think the question behind the question is think through, how do I honor the legacy of the person I just received these assets from?
Yeah.
And then I think the big third thing is take care of yourself too. And let's plan for some long-term goals. Maybe now it's not the time to go buy, uh, the most expensive wristwatch you can think of,
Right.
like you did win the lottery. It's the time to take a breath, find help with a professional, and think through how this could meaningfully impact your life for the positive.
Yep. No, I agree. Yeah, and there's, maybe the last thing is just a simple question, kind of a filter to run through is this money would be well used if it helped me blank. And that could go to any of those buckets, it could go to anything. But if you just filter it through that simple question, I think it will help you at least come to an intentional decision, not one that's reactionary. And that's the big point we're trying to make here is you have a unique opportunity here to do something great with the money that honors this person and helps you, which I think is what they would have wanted. They left you money for a reason. So run it through that filter. This money would be well used if it helped me X. And we can help you think through that if you're struggling with it. But I think it's an important thing to think through before you make decisions.
Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again soon.